joined CAPA recently, so I asked him to be our speaker this week and how to perform on media. So, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Brian. I hope everybody can hear me and read the slides. So it's interesting hearing a couple of local authors because there's media of all kinds, and when you sell a book, your goal is not to sell books when you write a book, but you've got to use the media to help you drive the sales. And when I talk about media, so I say, think like a journalist. By journalist, I don't just mean the New York Times. I mean the Hartford Current, the local Connecticut blogger, the person on social media, the podcaster. So you've got to think about what's out there because the media is a big food chain. And if you do well in one interview, it can pick up steam, especially on social media. So if you read any news, whether it's online or in print, I don't know if we print anymore, you've probably seen a lot of people who have been media trained. But very often, either the media training doesn't take, or the person thinks they need media training, or perhaps they haven't done media training. I had a podcast host recently writing back.
Are you running this Zoom? Because it's
After we interviewed an author,
it's on YouTube.
this person didn't shut up for 25 minutes. He didn't let me ask a question.
I don't need to go in. I just
So you want to have a conversation with the media. Doesn't matter whether it's a reporter, a print story, or an online story, or a podcast, or even national TV. It's a Q&A, it's back and forth. You may not like all the questions. We have to listen to the questions.
I don't need to be here. I just wanted to put his contact information in the chat.
I'm not going to listen.
But I don't know how to do that if I'm not getting in.
Some people, they find media like having a conversation. They like it, they enjoy it. Others, I've heard talking to a reporter, like going to the dentist. And that's an extreme example. Who likes to go to the dentist, right? But it doesn't have to be that. There's a lot of media training I can talk about, but I want to focus on books, because that's what we're here for. So I wrote a book today as a reminder when you are going to meet with a reporter, even if you're on a podcast, have your book with you. You've got a good cover, you've got a good story, but if you can't get the book cover in front of the media, whether it's just mentioning the book title, getting the cover on the internet, it doesn't do any good. Your publicist, which I do publicity as well, your publicist should get the book or PDF or ebook or some version of the book in front of the reporter before the interview. But reporters sometimes are doing 10 stories a day. They're frustrated, they're angry, they're pissed off, they lost their job last week, they had their beat changed. So reporters sometimes just forget. So I always say, bring an extra copy, or bring 2 copies, but have the book with you. Also, this needs to be the focus of your interview. You're on this interview because you wrote a book that the media thinks is either interesting. In the case of this book, with mass shootings everywhere, this woman must have an interview every other day. She got lucky, if you will, that this story doesn't end. Most books have, and publicity and media have a shelf life of 3 to 6 months. So you've got to know how to nail the interviews in that initial period. So let's start with some of the things you should do. You've written this book, you've had editing, you've toiled over it, you know your book better than anyone. But you have to be able to say, okay, someone says, okay, you're writing a book. I'm giving you 30 seconds. What is your elevator pitch? What is your book about? Now, I don't want you to have it memorized. You shouldn't feel like you're reading to the interviewer. You should be able to just talk in conversational tone, saying, here's my book. This is what it's about. This is why it's important. And by the way, there was an op-ed in the Hartford Courant today that's right on point to my book, and I can talk more about that. At the same time, the reporter might ask you, what do you know about guns? There was a story in the newspaper today. What do you know about this? And you've written a book about this. And if your response is, all I know about that question is what I read in the newspaper, that's the wrong response. You're on this interview as the expert. Once I had a client on TV give that exact answer. All I know is what I read in the paper. And I was in the green room of the studio, and I sort of like this. I said, this guy is very good. Why did he do that? 5 minutes later, the producer walks over to me and says, what the? Fill in the blank. I said, I know, you shouldn't have said that. And she said, yes, you shouldn't have said it. If he comes on again and gives me an answer like that, he will never appear on the show again. Because anybody can read a newspaper and say, yeah, I read the article, but if you're the expert. So you have to think about, how does your book fit in with a trend in your community, a trend in your state, or how does it fit into something in the news? Because sometimes it is hard for a book publicist to find a place for a book in a media cycle. If there's so much in the news cycle every day, you've got to find a hook with a book author. So journalists, they sort of think in code. There's something called the 5 W's. And that would be what, why, who, when, and where. I would also add how. And your book may not be able to cover all of those, but you want to be able to answer as many of those questions, because they're going to ask. Because if they don't ask the question, their editor's going to say, well, why are you writing this story? So the journalist has to not only please you, he's got to please his editor and the readers. When you're doing an interview, as I said, the journalist either has the book, or in the case of a broadcast or podcast, they should mention the book at the beginning and the end of the interview. Here's Elizabeth Williamson is here today to discuss her book about Sandy Hook at the beginning and the end. You don't have to, throughout the interview, repeatedly refer to the title of the book. That's sort of over-promoting. You're not there, you are selling product, but you're not hawking product. So if you have not heard the interviewer on a podcast or TV or any other broadcast medium, you haven't heard them mention the book at all. Yes, you should mention the title, but not 5 times. Because they'll edit that out and they'll think you're trying to just beat the book's title to them. There's plenty of stuff to talk about without resorting to that. That's what I would call a journalist pet peeve. If you get on their pet peeve list, you've already lost it. Journalists, like I said, they can be rough, they can be picky, they can be testy, they can be prickly, but it's not personal. I used to be a journalist. It's gotten worse now. They have less resources, they have more stories to write, they have online stories to write, they have print stories. So often they have just been handed your book as a story, another story to write. Unless your publicist has targeted a specific reporter for a good reason, maybe they will focus on it more than they otherwise would. Now, I know we all have various degrees of technology knowledge, but COVID did one good thing. It started Zoom. Even though I'm tired of Zoom, Zoom is good for interviews. You don't have to travel half an hour to the studio. You can do it from your home. So you have to get up to speed to know how to use Zoom. There are other varieties of Zoom, which I'll talk about later. But you want to look presentable when you're doing this. Now, it used to be everybody on TV had to wear a suit and a tie. And we're long past everyone had to wear a suit and a tie, but you want to look good. I had a guy who was on a Zoom call. He had a red shirt on, he was chewing gum. And I said, why are you chewing gum? Put a better shirt on. Put a good background in the back of your camera so you look the part. You see, a lot of these people on TV, they have bookshelves behind them. Okay, that's better than having, you know, a dog in back of you. There was recently a guy on TV, some law professor. He looked like he came in from walking his dog. And to me, that I know who he was. He was well known, but it takes away from your message. If they're looking at something like, say you're wearing a wild Hawaiian shirt, I wouldn't do that, but that sort of takes away from what you're trying to say. There was a guy on TV recently, he was wearing a college sweatshirt. And I said to myself, why is he wearing a college sweatshirt? So when I watch the media, I'm thinking of not only what they say, but how they say it, what they look like. So yeah, we're a very casual society now. Even the basketball coach at my alma mater, North Carolina, he no longer wears a jacket and tie on the sideline for games. He wears like a Carolina sweatshirt. Fine. But a TV segment or a podcast interview is not a basketball game. You have to dress better than that. I know it's, like I said, we're in a casual society. You know, COVID didn't help. But think about your audience. You sort of want to come across as the knowledgeable expert who looks good with no distractions. You want to be asked back again. So the idea is I've had authors have multiple interviews because they like what they said. So again, if you think you know your book, hey, maybe it's worth reading parts of it again before your interview, writing down 5 bullet points that you want to highlight. And again, it's like this elevator pitch. When you're talking about the 5 bullet points, conversation. We don't want to sound like we memorized it or it's rote. Maybe you need to start subscribing to newsletters, excuse me, or websites that might have something to do with your book. This may help you keep up with news that might tie into your book. If it's in the news, you can connect this to the interviewer and their audience, or your PR person could already have picked something in the news about your book. And the PR person should have told you, yes, this is the local pitch. Here's a story. Read this story. Often, if your PR person is doing his or her job right, they've sent you some background about the report. Maybe you have a college or a high school in town. Maybe they'll send you some previous stories they've written, or previous interviews, and you get a sense of their style. Because sometimes, as I said, they've got all their other pressures, or they've got some axe to grind, or they have their own bias. So this is all their problem. It's not your problem per se, but you have to adjust and adapt to it. So basically, we're talking about a variety of types of media. So podcasts. These have just exploded. There's so many podcasts in so many categories, it's hard to keep up with these days. But they do a lot of author interviews. Some of them specialize in authors, and some of them will take a lot of authors on. And as I mentioned, COVID has given us Zoom, good or bad. A lot of interviews on podcasts are done by Zoom, so it's important to understand how to work it and how to look it. I mean, Skype is still around. There are other programs that podcasters use, like something called Zencaster, Restream, and StreamYard. They're basically called Zoom. Why they have to come up with some other names to them, I don't know. It must be a technical thing. And they work the same way. Make sure you have a good microphone. Make sure your lighting and background look good. on Zoom, some of them will run both an audio version of a podcast interview and a video version. And they'll wind up on YouTube or other websites. So that's another reason that we need to look the part. Just because you're doing an audio, quote-unquote, podcast, doesn't mean you're not going to wind up on video on YouTube or somewhere else, and you don't want to be the guy who's on YouTube talking about his book in a ratty shirt chewing gum. You want to look good. Radio, yeah, still around. People still listen to radio. Essentially, a podcast is online radio. But because it goes automatically to online, it's a slight variation. Radio, you're going to get a radio clip on the radio show, and you might actually get a story on the radio station's website. So here you want to remember short sound bites, not the guy who talked for 25 minutes straight. Because the reporter likes to have short sound bites that you follow up with questions. The audience is going to listen, but they're not going to listen for 25 minutes. You're going to lose the audience. So we've got TV is everywhere. TV, online video, YouTube, they all sort of run together these days. So you've got talking points that you've written down. But a reporter often is going to come up with their own questions. And you have to be able to adjust and pivot and answer their questions, which are going to be dealt with either a live interview or a tape interview. If you're live, once it comes out of your mouth, that's it. It is hard to get them to correct it, but if you realize you said something wrong and you're live, just immediately correct it. If it is taped, try the same thing. I mean, it's hard to get a correction often in the media. There are times where I've had to get corrections made. Clients can misquote or said something they didn't want to say. And the problem sometimes is once a correction is made, sometimes the correction gets put in incorrectly, if I'm saying that right. So they make a mistake when they put the correction up, and it's like you have to try to get it corrected again. I had a client once who was misquoting an author. He was not just misquoted, his name was wrong in print. They had the book, a book tour, they had the book, they had his name, they somehow took the book publisher name and made that the author's last name. And I'm sitting at home on a Sunday when I get a call from this guy from Cleveland and says, what happened to my name? I said, well, the reporter screwed up, we got a correction. So I got a correction online, I didn't get a correction in print. So you've got to be careful to try to be as accurate as you can. If the reporter screws up, leave it to the PR person to try to fix it. You can't control these things, unfortunately. So now we come to print and online, which I call newspapers, magazines, and blogs. This is sort of like old media meets new media. Because everybody used to read newspapers, now print readership is way down. Everyone reads online, reads on their phone, reads on social media. But you still have to have your message there. You still stick to those talking points. It doesn't matter if the reporter is a print reporter or a TV or a podcast. It's still the same. They're doing their story. You want to get your message out about the book. And everything else I said earlier about the book still applies. Don't talk for 25 minutes. Make sure they mention the book and they know the book. They know your name. They know how to spell your name. Hence the guy who's got his publishing company in his last name. That's a total screw up. But I have a friend who was a media attorney for many years, and he always reminds me that the reporter is not there to be your friend. Some of them might appear friendly when they're not being pissed off at their day or whatever they're dealing with. But don't go off the record with a reporter you don't know. My friend the media trainer used to say to me, don't go off the record with a reporter unless they're your blood brother or your blood sister, and he's exaggerating for a reason. Be careful. If you can't say something on the record that you're comfortable with, don't go off the record. I And you can't go off the record on TV, that doesn't work that way. You can go off the record with a print reporter or interview reporter, but you don't want to do that, unless you know them very well, unless there's a reason to. If you're hyping your book, I don't think there's any reason to go off the record unless you know something about a topic that's unrelated that they're asking about. But I still think you have to get to know the reporter well enough before you start delving into off the record. Media also does Q&As. These are very easy. If you have the questions in advance, some reporters will give you questions in advance, and some won't. If you have an advance, you can prepare. Unless you're responding by email, that's easy. But if you're doing the responding, in an interview, again, you don't want to have those answers sound prepared. And the reporter can always come up with a left field type question, ask you about something you weren't prepared for. And you can say, I don't know the answer, or if it's not a live interview, you can say, can I get back to you on that later? You don't have to always give an answer right away, unless you lie and you look silly, but you've got to deal with it. And I think that there are some baseball fans, remember Yogi Berra, it ain't over until it's over. So there's always a microphone in a broadcast interview. And you don't want to say anything. If you're at the end of the interview, you don't want to say something you didn't want to be included in the interview. So you have to wait until they take the mic off, or they say thank you for the interview, and you know you're not physically attached to a microphone. A few other things. As I said, I watch a lot of news. My wife and I are watching Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC, and they had this prosecutor on about Trump, who's on all the time. And he's in either a hotel room or his bedroom or somewhere. And we both look, and we're looking back at his camera. He's got his bathroom door open, he's got his toilet visible in the shot. And he screwed up, the producer screwed up. This kept on going for like a 5-minute interview. The next thing you know, his dog is running it back with the camera. And I'm thinking, what is going on here? It was ridiculous. You have to think of these things. It distracted me. I wanted to hear what the guy was saying. We all kept looking at the toilet with the dog. Now, I've never seen that happen before. The next time he was on, that's all I was thinking about was the toilet and the dog. I said earlier, how you look is important, and we all look different. I had this client, the same client who gave the producer the answer, all I know about that topic is what I read in the paper. He just did great on TV, I don't know why. He was bald and he had glasses, and he put on lip gloss. And for whatever reason, the camera lights were reflecting off of his lip gloss. And I realized that, David, stop with the lip gloss. You've already pissed the producer off by saying, you don't know anything else, what's in the paper. Don't put your lip gloss on before the end. These are minor things, but they sort of reflect,
Literally.
Yes. So, this is not really media training, but this is something on how to deal with. You have a schedule. The PR person has gone back and forth with this reporter. Schedule an interview. Put it on your calendar. Write down your forehead. I don't care what you have to do. The worst thing you could do is miss an interview or be late for an interview. So I had this client who didn't tell me this is an extreme example, so I think that's the point. Leave enough, if you're driving somewhere, leave enough time to get there. Don't get stuck in traffic, leave enough time. If you have, we all have busy lives. If you have 4 or 5 other things to do that day in the interview, maybe you want to do it a different day. But don't make your day so crazy that you mess up the interview. In this particular case, I had this guy lined up to be in London, where he was going to be anyway, in front of Parliament the day of Brexit, and he decided, instead of going straight to London, he wanted to go visit his grandchild in Chicago, and he missed the plane to London. So I missed the interview. And that's not going to happen to all of you, but my point is, as you can tell, just make sure you don't miss the interview. Trying to reschedule an interview, you could lose the interview. Back on microphones and Yogi Berra, I was also thinking of Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney forgot there was a mic and insulted a reporter once. I don't think any of you are going to do something like that, but I'm not wearing a lab, but if you're on broadcast and you have a lab, again, make sure it's off. Just a reminder. I can talk at length. I just wanted to give you some highlights, and I think they apply whether it's your local blogger or your statewide newspaper or some national or podcast or broadcast interview. So that's pretty much the highlights. So I want to thank you for having me here, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Is it still, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So you lived in Manhattan on Roosevelt Island, and you had clients in New York area and across the country?
Yeah. I think if you're dealing with a podcaster, I'm not sure if you're with Joe Rogan or something like that, dealing with a podcaster who does these kind of interviews on a regular basis, I've only had a couple of times with a podcast host say, that person wasn't media trained, or your client went on for 25 minutes. Sometimes the client doesn't like the way the podcast host edited the interview. But this is the thing, when you're doing an interview, you're sort of playing with fire every time you talk to the media. Once you do the interview, unless it's live, you don't have control on the edited version of the outcome. And even if it's live, you don't have control over the way the interview is slanted, the questions they ask. So, I was giving you some extreme examples. Most reporters are mad out to get you. I hope I didn't give that impression. They're not. They're just busy.
So do you have any control, creative control, like, I know you say you don't, but would they be able to let you listen, let's say, broadcast, before they decide to broadcast it, or put it online?
No, some print reporters, depends on the media food channel. The New York Times very rarely will give you, almost none of the time, will give you the full story beforehand. Some reporters might do what's called a quote check. They will get back in touch with you and say, can I double check these quotes? But you're not going to get a copy of a broadcast interview to be shown to you before it goes on the air. It doesn't happen. It's their job to edit it any way they see fit. And you've agreed to the interviews, you've done the best job you can. And I'm going to disagree with Trump. He thinks that all publicity is good publicity. I don't agree with him. There is bad publicity. But if you do a decent interview, you get the title of your book in the interview, you get the book cover on the website, that's all you can ask for. Then it's up to you and your publicist to make sure that the interview gets distributed to all your email list and your social media, and then you've used the interview to drive publicity and hopefully sales of your book. I hope I answered your question.
Is this still a common practice not to wear white when you go on television?
I think that people wear all kinds of things these days. Look at check jacket, wasn't it?
Well, you don't want, either, this way, and I want to see you produce it. You don't want to wear the kind of shirt that Andy's wearing right
I
now.
knew when I put this on, they didn't put the wrong shirt, put on.
Because depending on, you know, the quality of the camera, it's going to make the lines, some of the jagged lines, red is like the color, you're not supposed to wear. And I haven't heard about white, except it depends on why, yeah, they want to.
You know, there are ones in your life, but there are certain shots on TV that the term is called blown after true light. If you're talking a true light shot, it's like they don't see, you know. So yeah, I mean, there are certain things, certain colors, certain styles that you should or should not wear. And whoever is going to put you on a broadcast situation should go over that entire list with you. I just think in general, you don't want to distract. You don't want to wear big clanky bracelets, like that chewing gum. You just don't want to distract from what you're trying to say. And what you wear, I think, could distract from the message, you know.
I would just add one of the things that in a TV studio, they're going to like talk to you, they're going to go through all, you know, if you let us like in a studio. More importantly to think about is the example that Andy Zoom had, the Zoom interview, where, you know, you forgot that the back door was open and things. That's the case where everybody, we've gotten used to it in the pandemic, but you really want to invest in one of those lights that where you put your phone in the middle light. You really want to light yourself. Lighting is the most important thing when it comes to video camera or any of those. Yeah, and they just give you enough light so that it punches you up a little bit so that you know you're not going on.
When you're in the studio, you feel it. It's like when they go 3, 2, 1, it's like a microwave coming on, you know?
The weird thing about that guy who was on, Andrew Weissman was the prosecutor's name, the weird thing was he had been on so many times before. So I don't know whether he screwed up. If I'm the producer, I'm talking to somebody's ear and say, move the camera. It's like,
Yeah, I saw that interview too, on Lawrence O'Donnell. I think part of the problem was he had been doing interviews all day long, and
Sure.
that back to the hotel room, it was probably oversight.
look, if you are lucky enough to have a book or a news story that you were doing multiple interviews in a day, then I could care less as your publicist if your bathroom is overflowing. You've done 10 interviews, but that's a great job. But it was a minor thing, I think it's hilarious.
Yes, on the body.
I think maybe because it's a book thing, but, you know, to your point about no distractions, when we're not talking about books, when you have like celebrities on, the more outrageous they are with their, you know, whatever is distracting, I feel like that is what gives them the attention that they need.
I would display it a lot. I mean, sure, I mean, I've seen people do that.
That's what.
Yeah, I mean, some authors will have their book sitting on their bookcase in back of their camera. You can see the book
Yes.
sitting on the bookcase.
It's gotta be pretty close though. Because if it's way in the back, then sometimes it's not a lot of it is. So you always want to check the shot. You know, set it up.
Well, let's say that people are just using different strategies to do that. Even if they mention in the book, you know, they're doing something that's distracting, like maybe, I don't know, some long sleeve something, whatever. But their book is like kind of.
You don't want to get lost in those.
So,
Also, if you hold your book up, don't put your hands over the title.
Well, no.
Some people do that. So hold your book up, have your hand
I
over
mean,
the title.
you know, sometimes I'll have an author, and by the time I get the author to do PR, they've already come up with their title. And it's not my job as a PR person, media trainer, to give them their title. Some of these titles, I go, oh, my head's hurting. How am I gonna sell that title to a reporter in the subject line of an email? How am I gonna fit the title in the subject line? It's just, I have to think about it, man. Yes?
Can you speak to the example of the Villar and how the author needed to the Jane dog?
Sorry, which
The
one?
Jane dog?
Yes, yeah. I had a client who wrote a book about GMOs and genetically modified food, and somehow this guy was lucky enough to have Jane Goodall, everyone knows who she is, I assume. She wrote the forward to the book, and thought, oh, great, we can use Jane Goodall to publicize this no-name author's book, and we did. And so I sent it to Bill Moore, and Bill Moore said, great, we want to have Jane Goodall. Now, what do you think happened next? The author said, oh, I want to be on Bill Moore. I said, you don't understand, they don't want you, they want Jane Goodall. So I said, here's what I'm going to do. I didn't do this. I said, I will ask them again. I knew they weren't going to have them on. I said, here's what I'll do. I will only let Jane Goodall go on if Bill Moore puts a copy of your book up on the screen and talks about it. So they agreed. So they put Jane Goodall on. They talked about Trump. They talked about chimpanzee and Trump and Bill Moore. And they put up the cover of the book, and the client was happy. And then Jane Goodall talked about everything else she normally talks about. That doesn't happen very often, but you've got to come up with any way you can to get the title in there. In that case, I was ready to say to the client, don't ask me one more time to get you on Bill Moore. They're not going to do it. When a producer says no, you may not like the answer. There are times you get declined. Your media training didn't even matter if you couldn't get the interview. You just have to accept it and move on.
You got it.
Yeah.
So, according to your bio, it says you've done mostly nonfiction books.
Yes.
Have you represented anybody that has written fiction books?
I think a couple, but it's just the way it's worked out. It's just been mostly nonfiction.
But you film,
Yes.
you film and other types of education.
When you say you do film, does that mean you represented people for the film rights?
No, my wife is a video and TV producer, and so I've done some hair work for her and other clients who have made films.
In other words, he reps the film, my films, but he's rep, just like he would represent an author. So, that's a direct. And so, yeah, so I didn't need to jump
I
in.
think, Peter, you're talking about the book agent taking your book and trying to sell it to a film or TV, right?
Obviously, that's something in the back of my mind, but you're a publicist, and I'm trying to distinguish a little bit right now between the role of a publicist with a fiction book as opposed to an agent and what they might do.
Well, an agent, because I worked with an agent on a book who hired me for his client's book. And at the same time, I was doing publicity for the book. He was trying to sell film rights for the book to a film studio. So, to me, the only difference between a nonfiction book and a fiction book, and often, you might know this, a novel can be based on a true event. It can be a fictionalized event. But if I'm dealing with something that's real and news, and nonfiction is not. So, I know a guy who wrote a book based on Governor Andrew or Mario Cuomo. He called it Dynasty on Hudson. And it was a fictionalized account of all the goings on in Albany, New York. But it was a novel. And so he was trying to publicize that as a way to help. He's a GOP operative. He was trying to use that book to sort of further his political career. So there are ways to cross over to answer your question from fiction and nonfiction in terms of publicity and things like that.
So I recently did an interview, it was a friendly interview with an audiobook producer that I'm working with. And it was a Zoom interview, A, said don't wear red, and B, had an external mic for the Zoom call. And I went out and bought a external mic, but I still wasn't happy with the sound of my voice in the interview. It's because, I don't know if it was because of the quality of the microphone, or how much should we invest in things like, external mics or background lighting or things like that? Do you recommend that?
Well, I guess it depends how many of these interviews are you going to do, and is it worth it?
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to do a million of them, but maybe a few more down the road, I guess.
An external USB mic is an investment everybody should have.
Yeah.
Because the mic is built into your laptop, ain't nothing.
Yeah.
I've had some podcasters, a lot of podcasters will send out specific instructions, and one of them I forget exactly what it said, but it was specific. Here's what I need the person being interviewed to do as far as they had to use Blum, they had to, there was a whole list, and one of them included specs on that external monitor. Sometimes they'll tell you exactly what they need. And I think if you're gonna end up doing enough of them, you ought to go out and price it, and you just gotta decide if it's worth economically for you, you know, what kind of.
I spent $100 on this mic, but I mean, you can buy a studio quality mic price than $500.
Try that out.
I mean, think about it, if you're doing audio interview, as I said, sometimes they end up being video too. This is what happened, one of these clients, the one who was chewing gum and all that nonsense, he didn't like the way this podcast interview came out. And he wanted to edit it after it came out, and I said, look, the podcast producer was not gonna re-edit the interview. So this guy was such a nudge, sometimes people are nudges, that's just the way like this. He said, I'm gonna edit it myself. I said, okay, edit it yourself. And he says, would you go back to the producer and see if in fact he will do it? And I said, well, I can almost guarantee you he's not gonna repost your edited version. I mean, of course he didn't. So you've got to decide, is it, you know, that was an audio issue, and it was probably because the guy didn't have the right mic.
Yeah, my voice came out, because I got a little voice anyway, as it came out, I was, sounded like I had marbles in my mouth.
So, you know, there are certain things that are media training issues, there are certain things that are PR and publicity issues, and then you get into this area. I'm not a tech expert, okay, I've picked up a little on the way, my wife is more of a tech expert than I am, but there may be a time when you're doing enough with the book and media, maybe you've got to hire somebody to help with some of this tech stuff. It might be a worthwhile investment if you're doing enough to make it economically feasible.
Question, have you ever represented someone who like wrote a spiritual motivational book, something like that?
I've had people who wanted to write these kind of books. And I think you self-publish.
I self-publish.
And so I had this lawyer client, when he found out that I did book publicity, he wanted to start, okay, what can we do? This guy is a very prolific writer. And he wanted to see if I could find him an agent. You know? And I didn't think his motivational book had enough oomph to it. Even to find an agent, I said, maybe you're going to have to self-publish it. I don't know the exact number, but there are hundreds, if not thousands of books published every year. It's just a very big deal, you know?
Now, do you keep all the books that you decide to publicize before you decide to take the project on?
Sometimes, I think it is best to have time between the publication date and the start of media training and publicity. But sometimes, an author or their publisher can't get their stuff together, especially in COVID. Everything got altered. Publishing dates got pushed back. PR plans got pushed back. So sometimes I don't see a book until the week before it publishes. And that's too late. You need to think about all of this months before you get the publication. So sometimes I'll see it beforehand. Sometimes I don't see it right until the way it starts. And that is, you're focused on writing and editing and publishing, but the marketing, you have to start thinking about the marketing before, a week before it publishes. You got a question in the back there?
Martha? Oh, it's for me? Oh.
What do you have a question?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm involved with documentaries, not books. And so, question, what is the role of a publicist?
in terms of,
Filmmakers.
well, I'll let my wife answer part of that, she's a filmmaker, but the role of publicist is pretty similar across many industries. But it's sort of how controversial something is. I mean, I also do crisis PR. I hope none of you get involved in a crisis you need crisis PR for, but there's general PR, there's book PR, there's film and documentary PR. So it's the same general role. You want to publicize person, the company, the film, the book, it doesn't change, it's just a different target, media target, you know?
I'm a documentarian also, and documentaries are kind of hard to get publicity for sometimes. But that's where Andy was able to help in our films because they were topical, and he was able to get us out proper press release. You know, you need all the same marketing tools when you're publicizing a film as you do for a book. And it's never too early not to be thinking about it. I've also done narrative films, and you want to spend 5 times as much money on the marketing of that film as you did to create that film. And even that much more time. You want to, it's the most important thing, and a lot of filmmakers do that to that as a filmmaker. But they don't think to leave enough money to market, and so you make this wonderful film, but then nobody knows it's out there. I can talk to you more privately if you want about the festival circuit and that kind of thing.
You brought up an interesting thing I was thinking of. I once had a book client who was the chairman of Pilot Pen Corporation, which used to be based in Milford, New Milford, is your day. But he's the guy who actually had the newspaper in Cleveland put the publishing house as his last name. So after he got over that slight, he once said, I don't understand the book publishing business. It seems like it's upside down. In other words, he was complaining, he was busting his tongue, but he wasn't making enough money off of the book. I said, well, yeah, because you're not Bill Clinton or Obama or Oprah. He's not at the bottom. Maybe he was in the middle of the publishing food chain. But this is a very weird business in that at the top are all these multi-million bestsellers, and then there are all these other authors and books. And my hats off to all of you for working on books. It's a tough business to make money at, you know. But marketing, I think it's sort of like, I do a lot of work for law firms too, and they're so busy working on legal issues, they sometimes forget that they have something they can publicize. And I'm not comparing any of you to lawyers, but it's the same process. You got to think about the marketing and media before it hits the fan on publishing. Yes, Brian.
You have a real good voice, and it's an example for.
Thank you.
Everybody.
It's not a horrible.
It's trying to make one, a tip for what I do. I do a lot of telephone, a lot of Zoom work, and I put the word voices up in front of me. And just an acronym, V might keep my volume up. And that trail off here in a sense. And then always the other person's perspective. So here's how my information can help you. It's not here's how great my book is, just to talk in terms of the audience. I have inflection. Adding to that inflection, adding accent from important words. So you're not talking in a monotone the whole time. If you're talking for 15 minutes in a monotone, it goes on. But you were good at that particularly. C is confidence. Not having a deep voice, but having a confident answer to a question. I used to send questions to the people in advance. So
You can do that.
So I would just, gave you the confidence to have that. Enunciation, to enunciate, particularly, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and just to enunciate words, which is kind of a function of S, which is speed. Sometimes I'm from New Jersey, I can talk too fast sometimes, but just, I remember, I really want to make a point. Pause, slow down, make the point, and then it's okay to talk a little bit faster to go on to the next one. But it's all, this is the point where I did a good job of varying all those things. This comes across better if we lose the visual from talking just over the phone. And that word has put up there all the time to remind me to come
That's
back.
a good idea. I mean, that goes to like I was saying, there was 5 bullet points you've written down. But if you can't do this on a TV interview or an in-person interview, but if you're sitting at your computer, if it helps you to have that on tape on the side of your computer or something else, do it.
And
Whatever it takes to get it, you know.
There's another good point there is upwards of a 30-second elevator pitch. Just to be able to, when you're on here, just to say, tell me about your book. And that changes for different audience. So if talking to the media, they're concerned about having a good show for the guests, the audience. Retail is looking for profit, for inventory terms and store traffic. Librarians looking to help their patrons, so that one sentence changes for each audience of which you speak.
Getting started on the 3 minutes on today's show. A lot of these podcasts, they might go 25 minutes or longer, so you have to think, you have to be able to sort of think ahead. Okay, well, I'm sure you think about it, you have enough. And sending them questions ahead of time is not a bad idea, but sometimes someone says, I have to be on for 25, 30, 45 minutes. Yeah, that's what you gotta think about. Okay, what am I gonna